Edward's going to be up there this.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I am live with Victoria Valentino, and it is a harrowing story. So, viewer discretion advised, but it's also a story of recovery. And, we're going to get to it in three sections. We're going to talk to Victoria about her life and her career, and what things were like growing up. And then we'll go through what happened with Cosby, etc. And then we'll get into the recovery section. But first, huge thank you for coming on, Victoria.
Well, thank you for having me, Sean. It was wonderful to be invited.
Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in Connecticut, primarily Manhattan, New York and Connecticut, but I was born in Hollywood. And my father was killed in World War II in 1944 in the Mediterranean when I was about 16 months old. My mother remarried eventually to an old Disney artist who was a background artist on Fantasia and Pinocchio and Bambi, all the old classics. So I grew up as a Scot-Irish, English, Scandinavian kid, but Sicilian. So it was very interesting. My parents used to sing opera together in the kitchen while they were cooking lasagna and ravioli. And, so I grew up with a singing lesson every day because they talked about perfect pitch and open throat and head tones and diaphragm breathing and projecting and all of that. And so, they were very interesting people.
And what was school like for you?
Well, we moved around a lot. So until we got to Connecticut, when I was about 10 years old, I was, moving from place to place, and it was very difficult, really, to establish close friendships. I was always the bookish girl, I loved to read, and I, loved classical music, and I had been an only child, so I was more comfortable with adults than I was making, chatter with peers. And people used to think I was stuck up, I am told, because I would be there with my nose in a book, but it was only because I was extraordinarily shy. And it was my way of coping and pretending I didn't care,
That's unusual, isn't it, to get into classical music at such a young age? Who were you listening to back then?
Oh, well, I loved Schumann's Piano Concerto in A minor, Grieg. Rodrigo's Concierto de Aranjuez was one of my favorites of Rodrigo's, and Haydn, and of course, all of the Italian opera impresario, the writers, the composers, Verdi and Puccini, and Chopin. I love Chopin's waltzes. But I also love the Beatles and Donovan and Neil Young and Crosby, Stills and Nash, and I'm a 60s and 70s rock and roll girl. So Eric Clapton.
Who were your favorite authors then, as well? You said you were into books a lot.
Yeah, well, my mother was a very literary woman, as was my grandmother, and so whenever I looked like I was at odd ends, they would hand me a book to read, and they had all these books from way back, like the 1700s, and so I wound up reading a lot of old books, old stories from pre-Revolutionary War days, but I read Tolstoy, I read Dostoevsky, I read Chekhov, I read Ibsen, Shakespeare. I did a lot of Shakespeare as a teenager, performing, because I was an actress, Glee Club and the Thespian Society and all of that. So I loved Shakespeare, and I performed St. Joan in I'm blanking.
It's all right. Take your time.
Anyway, it was this one monologue where St. Joan was basically consigning herself to the flames because she was confronting the Inquisition, and they were telling her that if she didn't admit to, being a fraud, essentially, that she would be, consigned to the flames. But even if she admitted it, she would still be imprisoned for the rest of her life, and she couldn't imagine being in a dungeon away from her angel voices and riding her great steed out in, in the fresh air with the birds and the trees and the sky and all of that. So that was one of my favorite parts.
So with all of these influences on you at such a young age, what did you want to be when you grew up, kind of thing?
Well, I wanted to sing and dance on Broadway. First of all, I wanted to be an archaeologist because I was fascinated by archaeology, and I wanted to go to Africa and India and feed starving children. That was one of my earlier things, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. And my folks were all involved with show business, so that was the only world I was really knowledgeable about. I was surrounded by a lot of crazy theater people on Broadway, courtesy aunties and courtesy uncles who were performing, and The King and I, and all of these different, they call me Mister, and 40s and 50s bohemian theater people. So that was sort of my background, and everybody breaking out and singing arias and show tunes, and so my parents kind of always steered me away from anything that wasn't something they understood and valued. And, so ultimately I discovered that while I was very shy amongst my peer group, once I got on stage, all bets were off. The larger the audience, the better.
The more energy you feel, the larger the audience, don't you?
Yeah, well, that's the beauty of live theater, because you don't get that when you are doing film or television. You don't have that feedback, and it is the energy. I mean, it's a synchronous thing, when it's synergistic, when you have a live audience, you're playing to humans, who then have feelings that you feel and they kind of vibe back to you. So, there's this energy exchange, and it's just marvelous. I mean, there's no drug in the world that's better than that.
So what happened when you graduated from school?
Well, actually, I didn't graduate, but I didn't tell anybody until I was 40 something. I lied because I was so ashamed of not graduating. But I had gone away to school in New York for my senior year of high school to the American Theater Wing and majored in musical theater. And then in the morning, I was going to a school for theater children called the Professional Children's School. And my classmates were none other than Christopher Walken. Ronnie was his name. It took me years before I figured out that Ronnie was Christopher Walken. But anyway, and Lauren Hollander, pianist, and Ben Hecht, who's a famous screenwriter, deceased now. His daughter, Jenny, and I were best friends. And it was wonderful. And so the director of the school on Sundays would have teas at her Sutton Place Greystone for the senior girls and the UN diplomats who were in session at the United Nations that period of time during the year. And so we were supposedly being taught international etiquette, and everything. But I started wondering after years, thinking, well, maybe she was getting some kind of a kickback, because I don't know if I was the only one who lost her virginity that year to
Mm.
some diplomat. But anyway, my parents found out. And I got shipped off to my grandmother in Hollywood. They yanked me out of school just before finals. And under the pretense of my going for the summer to see grandma, I basically got dumped in West Hollywood, and went into a huge depression, and wound up essentially being vulnerable to a rather horrible predator,
Okay,
who turned out to be the father of my deceased son. Um,
okay. Let's go over this more slowly then, because I moved to Arizona as a young person when I was about 20, early 20s, and I used to visit Los Angeles. I used to visit Hollywood quite a lot. Very very busy place, isn't it? So what was that like for you as a young person in Hollywood?
well, it was really pretty awful, actually. I was a duck out of water, but and I always saw myself as a New York girl, cultured, more of a sophisticate. And I got out there and I couldn't understand why people weren't dressing up and wearing heels and a suit to walk down Sunset Boulevard. And everybody was kind of slopping around in shorts and flip flops, and walking slowly. And I was walking at a fast New York clip all the time. And I trusted people that I shouldn't have trusted. But I did get involved with an old folk singer, a guy named Hoyt Axton, who um, became an actor. He was in the Gremlins, but in those days, I guess I was 18 and he was 26, and he was, kind of gritty balladeer, and sang all the old folk songs. And he wrote a few songs actually that became quite famous. A song, "Joy to the World,
Mhm.
all you boys and girls," but that came later. Wrote Greenback Dollar and the Pusher Man and all of that. And we traveled when he was on tour, um, before his first album came out. So he taught me guitar and got me to put my poetry into music. And that got me started as a folk singer.
Mm.
So even though all of this other stuff was going on, that sort of grounded me in many ways, because I'd always been a writer. And even as a child, I wrote haiku and I wrote poetry, and so then I learned a few chords on the guitar, and I could then write songs. And so I did that. And then, of course, Vietnam came along and the civil rights movement, and that gave me a cause.
Mhm.
And then 1967, the Summer of Love. But in the meantime, I had a child, um, who I had to support. And it kind of forced me into acting in not uh, really bad films, but crappy films. Really. Um, I guess they would. I think they called them sexploitation films, but they weren't. Um, um, I mean, they show more in Outlander, at this point in time. They show more on daytime TV. It was all kind of simulated on the surface, but it was a storyline. But usually, every excuse to have the actress drop her top. So it paid the rent. I was a Screen Actors Guild member, but Screen Actors Guild was only wages, I think, were $50 more a day, and it was very difficult to get a regular uh, Screen Actors Guild job. Those were the diamonds, and so I could work all the time and make enough money to pay the rent and buy my kid clothes and get food in the house. And the problem with it was that I had been raised in a certain way, And it dragged me down so much, emotionally and psychologically. And my parents had moved back out to California by that time. And, they were shunning me, and, it was just not a good thing. And of course, my first husband was Afro-Cuban in 1963. So, that didn't do much to, you know, elevate their opinion of me in those days.
Victoria, how old are you when you arrived in Hollywood?
18.
And did you say that there was a bad situation arose quite quickly with somebody when you arrived?
Well, the first thing that happened, my grandmother made me get a job once she discovered that I was there for good. And I got a sales clerk job at some department store on Hollywood Boulevard. And the girls invited me to go to a party at a friend's house off the Sunset Strip. And I walked in and, still felt like a duck out of water, growing up in a pre-revolutionary town with, very conservative background, basically, even though my folks were sort of bohemian in many ways. And the host just walked straight up to me and put his finger in my mouth. And I was so upset. I found a phone and I went and I called my Algerian professor friend in New York and wept and cried and begged him to send me money to fly back to New York. And of course he said no, because he saw that I was incapable of being independent, and he would not, he was not willing to take me on, basically. Anyway, it was just very demeaning and demoralizing, and I just kept getting deeper and deeper and deeper into depression, and couldn't pull myself out of it. And so I wound up, being pretty much of a sitting duck for people who were not the kindest and most elevated, aware human beings on the planet. They were not spiritual. They were not kind. They saw the pretty face and the nubile body and the makeup that made me look a lot more sophisticated than in fact I was. And I wound up being kind of drawn in by this Afro-Cuban drummer who had been an escort to another folk singer. And I had met him through my roommate, because I'd moved out of my grandmother's house, yada, yada, and he just took over my life. He had come with this friend to visit my roommate and saw my jewelry and my good clothing. And I guess in the process of all of us sitting around smoking and drinking red wine and talking and getting loose in the tongue, he found out that I had a little bit of an inheritance coming when I was 21. And he started showing up at my door and acting as though he cared about me and, time to get your hemlines fixed. Give me your Italian knit suits so that I can take them to the tailor. The hems are coming up. Of course, I never saw them again. And it just progressed from there. And he was also the one who, with another photographer who had the idea that they should submit photographs of me to Playboy, a magazine I had never heard of. I was used to my father using models for his art. And so it never occurred to me that modeling for the man I thought was my husband at that time. We had gone to Mexico to get married. And I didn't know that if it wasn't registered in this country, it was not legal. But he knew. He was about 14 years older than I. And he knew that I was coming out of the 40s and the 50s, and you turn over your money to your husband. My mother always taught me that. You know, don't worry about arithmetic, dear. I was never good at it, and you never will be either, because you don't need to be. Your husband will take care of all of that. And so he certainly did. And so he and Harry Drinkwater, this African American photographer who actually was a professional photographer, they had me modeling for them. And it was under the illusion, I thought that I was helping them to become well-known photographers. And by submitting my photographs to this magazine that they were enthralled with, I was helping their careers. It never occurred to me that it was anything for me. Well, as it turned out, they turned over all the photographs, and I wound up becoming Playboy's Miss September 1963. And Playboy owned all the photographs, and they were never heard from again, the photographers, which didn't sit well with anybody. So my husband, if you can call him that, he decided to market me in some way or another in order to make up the difference. And so for 3 horrible months, using my Playmate celebrity at that time, I was sold to the highest bidder, and it just about destroyed me. And when I tried to escape, I was beaten to a pulp, and I managed to call my mother, who I had found out was now living in an apartment with my father, who had gone back to work at the studios. And without her warning me, she set the police up. And I also had hit my husband's 2 children, who were toddlers, and the baby, my baby. And my stepson opened the door, and the LAPD saw some interracial people there, and they used that as an excuse to barge in. That was 1964, October. And they barged in, arrested everybody, and my case was dismissed, but I lost all of my children.
No.
Yes. I was able to get my son back after a year, but my stepchildren, who didn't remember me as anything but their own mother, were not allowed to come back to me because they weren't legally or biologically mine. And they were abused in the foster home. And I didn't reconnect with them until probably about 12 years ago. And of course, they were already in their 50s by then. And it was just purely karmic. My youngest daughter was on an audition. She was the casting associate. And my stepdaughter, who grew up to be an actress, wound up being one of the actresses coming in for that day's casting call. And my own daughter recognized her name and turned around and said, "Was your brother this, I think my mother was your stepmother." And my stepdaughter's eyes filled up with tears. And she said, "So how many stepmothers am I supposed to have?" And they wound up hugging and being in touch and going out and hanging out for a while before she felt comfortable seeing me. She had heard about me, but didn't really remember me. And of course, losing her had changed my life entirely and haunted my dreams and everything about my life, always. So, it was, it's been quite a journey.
So that was really harrowing, and that was in your 20s?
I was
So
21 when that
was you was 21 when that happened.
It's October 64. And then the Playboy Club, the first Playboy Club on the Sunset Strip, opened New Year's Eve, 64. And I was free at that point. And so I had gotten a job working at the Whiskey A Go-Go cocktailing after I was out and away and free. And we heard that the Playboy Club was opening and looking for any of the playmates in the area to come and be bunnies. You know, the playmates are the centerfolds and the bunnies are the waitresses. So I went over and I worked, I think, probably for 6 months at that club. Yeah.
What was
And
that like?
oh, it was the hardest job ever.
Mm.
It was an 8-hour shift in 3-inch high heels and costumes that were very uncomfortable and a lot of rules and regulations. And it wasn't as fun as working at the Whiskey A Go-Go, I can tell you. Yeah.
What were the rules and regulations?
Well, first of all, you had to show up an hour before you had to be on the floor for, you know, the hour you didn't get paid for, and get into your costume, your makeup, your false fingernails, your false eyelashes, bust pads and ears and, you know, fluffy white tails and all of that. And if you got a run in your stocking, or if you got a scuffed shoe, or if your ears weren't on straight, or if your tail got a little dusty, you know, you would get demerits. And if you got 30 demerits, you would be fired. But you could earn back merits if you did promotions. So they got a lot of free television promotions out of us, you know, because of course we didn't want to get fired. We were making a big $2.03 an hour. But we made such great tips that sometimes we'd forget to pick up our paychecks.
So what was your life like as you approached your mid-20s?
Well, it was a struggle. You know, I was a single mom of a biracial toddler, and Vietnam. And I think the best year for me was the summer of love, when all the hippies started flooding into Los Angeles, and I started cooking for feed-ins and getting involved with protests against Vietnam, you know, just continuing on with that, and civil rights, and promoting love and peace, and, you know, dancing with beads and feathers and bells, and you know, we dropped a little bit of acid and a little mescaline and chewed a peyote bud or two, and found God, you know. And that was actually very healing, because it really opened me back up to a time when, because I had always been a very spiritual child. And so it really connected me back to my love of nature and spirituality, and it unleashed a lot of just creative thought. And I wrote a lot of good songs that year. And then I wound up in, that was 1967. 1968, I was initiated into transcendental meditation. And I loved that. That was wonderful as well. And then came 1969, and I did a few films. I was an extra in one of the Roger Corman films called, it was an H.P. Lovecraft story called Dunwich. And we went up on location. I took my son, and we were up 2 weeks in Mendocino County, and it was just absolutely magnificent. You know, the children were running in the green emerald fields and playing in the deep woods when we were on location. And I became friends with the late actress Sandra Dee. Her son was there, and he was a year older than my son. And so, you know, they played, and I made a commitment to myself and to him at that point that as soon as I was able, I was going to take him and we were going to move up to Mendocino because I just wanted him to be raised in nature and amongst down to earth people, who were grounded in something authentic. And so that was in the spring of '69. And then I was doing a couple of films, and in between takes, I was picking a little guitar, and one of the other actors heard my music. And he said he knew an agent who was trying to find talent for a producer at Capitol Records. And that producer was the lead guitar for the Animals, and a guy named Vic Briggs. And I played for him, and he said, "Do you want to make an album?" And I said, "Sure." So that started me on that journey. And then I wound up having a music attorney who was giving me a party to celebrate the successful negotiation of my recording contract, and my son drowned in his swimming pool at the beginning of that party. My son had just turned 6.
Oh my God, I cannot believe what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, Victoria.
So,
Whoa.
that changed everything. And I found out afterwards, he told me that my son was a fly in the ointment. And he had just been researching military academies. And he was angry with me that I couldn't possibly continue my relationship with him. He had told me to go into the house. He was outside working on his wine cellar that he had just completed. And he sent me inside to his sister-in-law was coming up the walkway with a case of wine to christen his wine cellar. So he was out there by the pool with my son. And I have long suspected that even though he didn't push him in, that he kind of maybe encouraged him to go down the slide, because with this little styrofoam surfboard, my son wasn't a skilled swimmer. And when I found him at the bottom of the deep end of the pool, face down with the styrofoam surfboard floating, it looked like he had gone headfirst down this slide and never come up. So that was instant insanity, I would say. I didn't complete the album because I just lost my music and I lost my heart. So shortly after that, about 3.5 weeks after that, my grandmother died, and I moved into her house with some roommates. And one of my roommates and I went to a little cafe called the Cafe Figaro. And that's where I ran into Bill Cosby for the second time. I had gone for an audition just prior to that. And because I was running out of my advance money for Capitol and I needed to eat. And my friend Francesca knew Cosby and set up an interview. And I showed up on the lot and handed him an 8x10 of my son. But he met me in his trailer wearing sweats. It wasn't an audition hall. And I think my son's photograph is what saved me from being assaulted in his trailer, because I have since learned that he assaulted a 14-year-old girl in his trailer. So I think that was what was most likely on his mind at the time. And he sat and he looked at my son's 8x10. It's the most marvelous photograph, black and white, with my son's little 60s afro looking directly into the lens, and serious and soulful and deep. And Cosby was mesmerized. He couldn't take his eyes off of my son. And I think it must have taken him back to when he was 4 and abused by his father and I think possibly he saw something of himself before he was the monster that he became. And I just sat there rattling off the story of what had happened. And I got so uncomfortable because he wasn't responding. He just couldn't take his eyes off my son's photo. And finally, I just got up and snatched the photo and said, "Thank you very much." And I walked out, and he was caught off guard. But by that time, he knew my story, you see. And so he used that as an excuse in the restaurant to come up to us. And he had also been mesmerized by my roommate's eyes. She was an actress with very pale blue eyes, almost white blue eyes. And he used my story, my knowledge of my grief. And I was crying that day. I was having a terrible, terrible, terrible day. I just couldn't stop sobbing. And he just took advantage of that. And he put her in charge of me. He said, "I'd like to treat you girls to a spa, and I'll give you the money to my girlfriend, and then let me know when you're finished, and I'll send my driver over to your grandmother's house and have him pick you up, and I'll treat you to dinner. I think it would be good for Vicky," which people used to call me in those days, which I hate. But anyway, so we did. We went to dinner, and I was still in, I really was in no shape to be anywhere. It was years, before I was functional in any kind of way. So I sat there playing with the food on my plate, and he was making a lot of, his unintelligible jokes, and I wasn't paying attention, and he was chatting her up, trying to charm her, and I was ignoring them both, just kind of counting the moments until I could get back home and curl up in bed in a fetal position again. And he put a pill down next to my wine glass and said, "Here, take this. It'll make you feel better." And I guess, I have to admit at that point, nothing mattered to me anymore. My son was dead, and he was all I ever lived and breathed for. So, I took the pill. I thought, great. I hope I will feel better. And he gave her a pill, and then he pretended to take a pill himself. And then he reached over in a while and put another pill directly into my mouth and directly into her mouth. And pretty soon our faces were in the plates. And I said, "I want to go home." And he said, "Oh, no problem. I'll take you." And we went to the parking lot, and his driver was gone. And I remember asking, "Where is your chauffeur?" And he said, "Oh, he had something else to do. I will take you." And of course, he didn't take us back to my grandmother's house. In fact, he took us way up into the Hollywood Hills to what he said was his office, but was undoubtedly his bawling pad, And she went directly over to a little love seat. It was clearly not a working office. And he was sitting next to her, and she was unconscious. And I saw that what he had on his mind, and I tried to distract him, but I was so drugged that whatever he gave us, I don't even remember. I never took downers, I was not that person. I was a quarter horse, not a trotter. So I liked diet pills in those days to get more work done, work longer hours, And so I was really sensitive to anything that might have been a sedative. And I tried to talk to him, and whatever I was saying was garble. I couldn't get it out of my mouth. And, I felt like Frankenstein in the old movies, and I was, grasping towards him, and finally he got so irritated. He stood up and he walked towards me very angrily. And I stood up because I was afraid I was going to get hit, having been beaten within the inch of my life many times in the past from my son's father. So I stood up and my knees collapsed, and I grabbed hold of him to keep from falling. And the next thing I knew, I was on my knees and he was on the love seat, and rest is history. And then he abandoned us, and we had no idea where we were. It was probably about 10:30 at night, and we were somewhere up in the Hollywood Hills. And I said, "How are we going to get home?" He said, "Call a cab." And he walked out. And I woke her up, and we staggered over to the phone, but we didn't know where we were. So she said, "Well, let's call home." And we thought maybe her boyfriend would be able to figure it out. And so we picked up the phone, and there was no dial tone. She said, "Oh, it must have come out of the jack." So she got down on her hands and knees under the desk, and there was no jack. It was an old prop phone, and the cord was cut. So then we realized, we had totally been duped. And so we ran out of there, and we were fearful of getting into the elevator because we thought, what if he came back and the door opened and he was there and we'd be trapped with him again? So we found the stairwell and clattered in our little high heels down onto the street and stood there and looked out, and way below us, the jewel lights of the city. And we just kept running downhill until we got to the Sunset Strip, and miraculously, a taxi was driving by. She hailed it and it stopped, and we got home. And I became very suicidal after that. And at that point, I decided that I would take my son in my heart, and I would get out to the country and leave everything behind. And my producer, Vic Briggs, lived out in Topanga Canyon with his wife, and they found a little place for me to stay. But my emotions, I think, were so raw. The woman was actually afraid of me, I was told, which is crazy, but I can understand it in retrospect. I was very cynical and angry and in terrible pain in those days. So I found a dirt floored garage that I lived in for almost a year, $50 a month. And I put my Persian rugs on the dirt and hung India prints against the concrete walls, and had a clay abachi from the Barbados Islands. And I walked in the hills with my son's dog and wrote a lot of painful songs, and was pretty crazy person. I drove around the curves in the canyon pretty fast, and had a jug of hard cider by my heels. And I even mainlined cocaine one night. And, I just figured I had nothing left to lose at that point. I'd lost everything. So my karma led me to this crazy singer-songwriter from Louisiana, poor little rich boy, son of a Cajun congressman, who, as it turned out, was quite an alcoholic. But one day he said to me, Vicky Blue, I love you, girl. I'm leaving for New Orleans in 10 minutes. You going with me? And of course I said, sure, nothing to lose. And so we went to Louisiana, and can't shoot the messenger because he took me to his mother. And his mother was the mother I never had. She was humble. She was loving. Her eyes would fill up with tears, and she'd look at me and say, Sha, I love you. I love you. And I left him, I can't tell you how many times, and I would go back for her, because when I got home to my own mother, I was not welcome. And I'd turn right around and hit the road and drive another 4 days back to Louisiana for her. And she never never asked any questions. She'd make me a bed on the sofa, and there was always a big pot of gumbo, and she'd hand me a cold beer and just tuck me in and love me. And she saved my life. She saved my life.
Victoria, my head has exploded several times because of what you've been through. It's like you must be reliving some of it, telling us about it. You're so brave. And everyone in the chat watching this live, it's just so much love and respect for you coming in and support. And we salute your bravery,
Thank you.
sharing your life story in such detail. You're such an excellent speaker, but good grief. I've got a 2-year-old son here. He just turned 2 at the weekend. And when you told me about your son, honestly, that was just like a sledgehammer to the brain. I can't imagine the pain you have been through and how you felt in the aftermath of that. But please, at this point of the story, is this where it turns around and nothing more bad happens to you from here? Please tell us that's the case. That's the case, because I don't know how much more we can take.
Well, the story goes on, but I can tell you that I need to grab my little charger and plug in really quickly. I just got to notice that my phone is getting low.
Yeah, please do that. I'll talk to the viewers while you do that. No problem at all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria, and thank you everybody. For just being so kind with your words and the support that's come in. And I hope that from now the rest of the story's sweetness and light. So Victoria has a book out. It's called Dirty Diamonds: The Repurposed Life of a Playboy Icon and Cosby Survivor. Victoria's book came out on November the 22nd, 2023. It's got 5 stars on Amazon. And the link for that is in the description box below this video. And there's also a website. Victoria's also got a website. It's www.victoriavalentino.com. And the link for that, if you're watching on YouTube, is in the description box below the video. I know a lot of people are watching on X as well. But you might have to go over to YouTube if you want to check out those links. And you can also, the book's also on amazon.co.uk if you're watching here in the UK as well. But it's called Dirty Diamonds: The Repurposed Life of a Playboy Icon and Cosby Survivor. And
I am plugging in.
Oh, thank you, Victoria. All right. So
hopefully we've got it.
Good.
Old phones, Okay.
All right, there we go. Yeah.
Hello.
All right, so we left off then, and you'd found a beautiful new life, and
well, it was peaceful. I had a baby, a little girl, who's wonderful, and he was, as I said, a pretty terrible alcoholic, and I wound up after 3 years having to leave, and took my daughter and went back to the family. And once again, we have these illusions of what home is, right? And so we think we're going home when in fact home is within us. And the people that we think are there to love us unconditionally often are the worst in terms of being judgmental and critical and unfeeling, lacking in empathy. And so I wound up spending a summer, and my wonderful cousin, who has passed away, unfortunately, from cancer, she remembered who I was before all of the ugly stuff happened. And that summer I stayed with her, and she was 4 years younger. She was like a little sister to me. And one day she said, put some clothes on, grab your purse. I'm taking you somewhere, and don't ask where. And I said, okay. And we went to a local junior college, and she handed me a registration form, and she handed me a class schedule, and she said, pick 2 classes, fill out this form. I'm paying for the classes. And so I wound up taking Spanish and psychology, and I wound up getting an A and a B plus. And it was probably the greatest gift anybody had ever given me. And it got me started going back to school. And I recommend it highly, because what going back to school does for you, on a college level, just a community college, you can take 1 or 2 classes where you can take a 2-year vocational program, and at the end of it actually have a profession, physical therapy assistant, respiratory therapist, registered nurse. But I, being someone who had grown up with an artist who had a studio in the house, as soon as I walked into the art department, of course, I smelled turpentine and oils and stuff. And so once I took that semester and I moved up to Portland, Oregon, and registered immediately for the community college up there. And I took 2 years of art history, basic design, graphic arts, and ceramics. And my little girl and I wound up moving out on a farm at the end of that 2 years with my third domestic partnership. He had been a roommate in the house that I lived in Portland, and we had this really deep, soulful, karmic connection. And so I had a 22-acre farm and started collecting dairy goats and chickens and ducks and pigs, and learning goat husbandry, and had another baby girl, who I home birthed. And most triumphant moment of my life, I can tell you that having a baby at home with a good midwife is 150,000 times better than having a baby in a sterile clinical setting in a hospital, unless of course you have health problems that need emergency treatment. But it was amazing. Unfortunately, her father turned out to also be a drinker, and he wound up letting me know after the baby was born that we had been evicted from the farm because he had drunk up all of the farm money. So with a 1-month-old baby, we were homeless. A 6-year-old daughter by then, and a newborn baby. So we lived that summer in a VW bus, camping out all over Oregon, which I had to make fun. And it was fun if I hadn't grieved for my wonderful herd of goats, who all answered to their names. And, I shrieked as they were being sold off and having to go down the dirt road in the back of a pickup truck. And my nanny goat never took her eyes off of me until she went around the windbreak, and it still haunts me to this day. I felt like such a traitor, I would have probably still been on the farm all these years later if it hadn't been for that. But anyway, so we camped out, and then we wound up getting a trailer at the end of the year so that my daughter could go to 2nd grade. And flat broke, and I thought, well, what can I do? So I noticed there was a little boutique art gallery in town, and I got some poster paper and some felt tip pens, and I made some signs and put myself out there as a dance teacher, and I had already spoken to the woman who owned the boutique. She had a 2nd floor with a big open floor in the gallery, and she let me teach dance classes to children. And So I did that, and then I expanded and started teaching dance exercise to adults as well. And one of them had an 85-year-old couple. Her parents lived up in Rainier, Oregon, on 40 acres overlooking the Columbia River amidst orchards. And she said, you could live on that 40 acres, if you would just kind of keep an eye on my parents. They really don't need anything, but I can't be up there. And so we moved the trailer into a winter apple orchard, and I would walk down and, visit and harvest the filberts and the petite plums and the apples and, make pies. And I kept teaching dance. I got the Old Elks Club to let me use their place, and I was teaching dance exercise there. And it was wonderful. And by that time, my oldest daughter was, by that time she was going into fourth grade, I think. She had all of her forts in the woods and would ride bareback across the fields with her friends. And I was feeling healthy again and, strong. And I remember her. She would walk the trail up to get the school bus, and she'd have her little backpack on and her long blonde braid down the middle of her back. And she'd stop at the curve before she was out of sight, and she would turn and she would wave to me and she'd say, "See you later, Mama. I'll make you proud today." And she's still that person to this day at 53 years old. So, and has given me two grandsons who are 27 and 21. Yeah.
Oh, congratulations.
Thank you. And my youngest daughter is 46, and she's given me four grandchildren,
Wow.
8, 12, and 14. And she home birthed all four of hers because she grew up with the wonderful story of her home birth. And she lives now walking distance from me. And we're all very close now. So I'm very grateful for that. But anyway, I decided at that point that I was well enough, and my older daughter was adopting everybody else's grandparents. And so delusionally, I thought it was time to come back to California to make peace and complete those healing circles, make peace with my family, and face my son's grave again. And when I got back, 2 days before Christmas of '82, my third domestic non-traditional partner, we were handfast, but we weren't, no paper connection. And he took it upon himself to walk away and left me with the children. And my parents were not happy to have this new family dropped off on them. My father had retired from the studios, and, he wasn't ready to take on the support of a woman and two little girls. So they lived down the street from Glendale College, and I hopped down the street and signed up for the nursing program at 39 years old. And I went back to college and graduated at 42 with honors, an Associate of Science degree, and an RN. And it was the best decision I could have made for my life at that point, because I needed a paycheck to take care of the kids. And my father was very upset because he thought I should go back into show business, go back into modeling. And my mother thought going into nursing was disgusting, her words. We were all supposed to be musicians and, actors and, opera singers and what have you. So, but ultimately, I was always the first person they called when they didn't feel well in the end, So in 1994, Playboy was looking for all the lost playmates for their 40th anniversary. And somebody mentioned they had heard it on the radio. And I said, well, I'm not lost. I know exactly where I am. And but they gave me the number, and I called, and I got on the guest list for the big party and celebrations and Playboy Expo at the Pacific Design Center, and and I got back involved, and I was by that time in my early 50s. So I didn't have to worry about anybody leching after me. So it was more fun than I had ever had with Playboy, because I could just go to the parties and dress up and be glamorous, and no more goat milking and hoof trimming, and and a lot of photo shoots and reconnecting with fans. And we did probably, I would say, 2, 4, 6, about 7 autograph signing shows every year, flying around the country, 2 in Chicago, 2 in New York, 2 in LA. I think there were Miami and Atlanta and Houston and different places. And it was just absolutely marvelous. And I started publishing a fanzine to the dyed-in-the-wool fans, the collectors, and just doing little stories about who we actually were as women and mothers and people outside of the centerfold, and took a lot of pictures at the Playboy parties and did montages so that the fans felt they were in the party. And it was a lot of fun. And I set up a situation where the Playmates could advertise directly to the fans for autographs, so that the fans didn't have to go through Playmate promotions, because then we only got our mail once a month, and all of our fan mail was opened when we received it. So, not saying anything, but we didn't know, a lot of the fans would send cash, and we didn't know, were we actually getting it all? So anyway, so that's what happened. And we had a really wonderful time. And then at one point, they were doing Playmate Revisited layouts. And I did one at 54 years old in 98, I think. And of course, they dredged up mostly my old photographs, and I was much more modest at 54. But anyway, it was fun, and it was great, and it paid 2.5 times more than what they paid for the centerfold in 1963, none of which not a dime I got from the 63 one anyway, but I got to spend all that 1998 money myself, so that was fun. And I got a ton of fan mail. Oh, and the other good thing was, before that, they had wanted the Playmates to submit a story, a fantasy, an erotic fantasy. And some of the other girls, I guess they submitted, well, I went on the shoot and I would see so-and-so doing this with so-and-so. But being a writer, I wrote a short story, an erotic fantasy. And so they got excited about that, and they published it as the entire text for one of those glossy publications, one of their newsstand specials, and did a little bio on me, a little headshot, and all of that. So I was very excited about that. It was my first published writing ever. And I got paid exactly the same amount of money for writing without taking my clothes off as I did for the centerfold. $1,000 in those days, Playboy centerfold, $1,000 for the centerfold. I think, I don't know how much they were paying towards the end of the hard copies in 2021. But last I heard, they were getting paid $25,000, for the centerfold. And I thought, boy, I sure missed out on that. But anyway, so we were just having a wonderful time at that point, and I just kept moving forward. And my mom died, my dad had died in 93, and my cousin died in 2015. And I started just, I don't know what I was doing. I moved to a wonderful little neighborhood in 2000. And I reconnected with my high school buddies in Ridgefield, Connecticut for the high school reunions, and started gardening and walking my dogs, and working, doing some private duty nursing. Oh, I know. I had a little TV talk show for about 15 years, and started interviewing people who, survivors. I was really fascinated by not sexual assault survivors so much as people who had overcome adversity and how they had transformed their lives and taken their pain and turned it into something healing and productive, not only for themselves but for others, and had decided, how can I fulfill my dreams now? How can I just put the suffering to the side? What can I take from that? How can I use that to become a deeper, more spiritual, more enriched human being, and and fulfill the potential God gave me? And have some time in my life that I'm not suffering, that I'm actually doing what I want to do, not what everybody else wanted me to do, or whatever slot people who saw me plugged me into. Oh, she's pretty, she should take her clothes off and be in the centerfold of a magazine that, she'd never heard of. And of course, my family had disowned me when I became a centerfold in 63. So, I had all of that to deal with as well back in that time. So I learned to be independent and self-sufficient. I had to. I was a mother. And so jumping forward again into the 2000s, I was doing that. And then I was also very involved with the AIDS epidemic in the 80s as a nurse. I was a day supervisor at the first freestanding AIDS hospice in the country down by Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. We had a 25-bed facility, and in those days, the guys didn't survive. I met a lot of interesting people who enriched my life and touched my heart, people who I carry with me to this day, people who I believe are with me always, and who I feel, along with my son, I have to make proud. So, I just did a lot of, I opened my life up. I expanded my horizons. I opened my life up to utilizing the grief and sorrow that I had experienced and the suffering that I had experienced, and try to be the catalyst for other people to tell their stories. And having become a much more empathic person, I think, through working in hospice, I found that healing, through service, we are healed. We get out of ourselves, and we can be with others as they're transitioning into the ether and help them sum up their lives. I became an ordained minister, not out of some spiritual journey necessarily, but it became that. I was helping out a girlfriend who had a marriage business, and I became an officiant. And I found myself really loving it, but not so much the marriages as somehow I wound up being shepherded into officiating at memorial services. And I loved that more than marriages. It was something about, there was something about summing up a person's life and celebrating that life and just putting together this final celebration for this man or this woman's soul. And it really touched my heart deeply. So I did that for a while, and being me, I, kept moving on doing other things because there's so many things to do, and I was called to speak out about my experience with Cosby, which I had stuffed for years. I had been more traumatized by the loss of my son and the loss of my stepchildren, and having, being utilized by my first husband for his own financial gain, that Cosby was the final blow. It was the last straw broken on an already broken back at that point. But I stuffed it, and I never talked about it to anybody. I just swallowed the grief and moved forward. And when I left LA, I just walked away from everything and decided, close that book, open a new chapter on a new book. And so one day I was shutting down my computer, and I saw that a woman had told a story in the Washington Post about being drugged and assaulted by Mr. Cosby. And I pushed it away because I didn't want to know about anything from the past. I just didn't want to unearth all of the dirt and the pain and that feeling of being grubby and used and abused and, horrifically damaged. And so I had heard actually in 2005 peripherally on CNN that there was a woman who had come out about him drugging her and fondling her. And my youngest daughter, and I just looked at each other and said, oh my God, that's a pattern. And that was the first time that it dawned on me that I wasn't the only one, and that I hadn't gotten assaulted because I was just stupid and, took the pill. But I again pushed it away. And so in the end of 2014, it was November 22nd. And I remember 22nd because my son's birthday is the 22nd, and the 22s are always my favorite numbers, And so as I was shutting down the computer and trying to ignore Barbara Bowman's story, all of a sudden this pop-up on Yahoo came up about a Black comedian named Hannibal Buress, who was doing a stand-up routine in a nightclub in Philadelphia. And his line was, come on, Bill Cosby, you're a rapist. And it just was, whoa. And it had gone viral. And suddenly something just kicked me into high gear. And it was like this little red rocket went off from my gut and exploded in my brain. I can't really explain what happened or why it happened in that moment, but that's what happened. And suddenly I'm thinking, oh my God, who can I talk to? Who can I talk to? And I went back and I looked at the story and saw that Barbara had been written up in the Washington Post. So I thought about that. But I knew somebody that worked for People magazine, and I thought, well, I'll talk to him first. And I contacted People magazine, and then I went to bed. And I got up in the morning, and that was full in my brain. And I ran to the computer to see if I had gotten an email or any kind of response. Nothing. So again, I went and looked at the Washington Post article, and I went to the Contact Us thing, and I plugged in, I was drugged and raped by Bill Cosby in 1969. And not expecting to hear back at all. Within the hour, Adam Kushner, the editor, called me, and it was a whirlwind from there. Suddenly I was being interviewed. Washington Post, audio-visual, the article came out in the Post, and then they sent a still photographer and a videographer to my house. And then the Daily Mail, UK Daily Mail, was walking up my street looking at the photo shoot over the hedge. I thought it was a neighbor walking their dogs. They wanted information about a playmate who had committed suicide, Paige something, and I've forgotten her name, sadly. And then MSNBC arrived at my house, and then a limo showed up to pick me up to take me to Inside Edition. And then another limo came to Inside Edition to take me to CBS on the other part of town. And it just went on. And I, Al Jazeera and yada, yada, until the night, it was already dark, and we had started at 7 a.m. And I walked into my house exhausted, hadn't eaten. I think Al Jazeera gave me some soup. Oh no, Jim Moret at Inside Edition had given me a little soup and some tea when I got there. And, but that was pretty much it all day. And I walked in, and I had left the television on for the dogs to keep them company while I was gone, and walked in just in time to see myself on the screen being interviewed, and the dogs looking at me and looking at the television where my voice was coming from. And they were just confused. And I was thinking, this is the craziest thing in the whole wide world. But it was so liberating, and it was so empowering. And I was so exhausted. I poured a big brandy, and I sat down, and not having eaten, it just completely knocked me out. And there I woke up in my chair, and I said, I need to get to bed and try to figure this out. And then the week started, and CNN flew me to New York. And then I met Barbara Bowman on CNN with another Cosby survivor, Jewel Allison, and Joan Tarshish, and one other woman whose name I can't recall. And it just was one thing after another. It just became a whirlwind, and we were on one show after another, and the Don Lemon special. And one week I was flown back. I got back from New York, and they turned around and wanted me to fly back immediately to New York, and for another interview. It was the most incredible experience that I just couldn't even imagine would ever have happened, based on just opening my mouth and finding my voice and exposing the predatory behavior of these wealthy, powerful, famous men who thought they could get away with it, who had a chrysalis around them that made them impenetrable, that they could do anything they wanted and destroy all of the lives. And I think the thing that really impacted me so deeply was all of the women who ultimately came out. 62 women came out about Cosby. But we each knew one or two or three others who didn't come out, who were too afraid for a variety of reasons. And they were completely authentic stories. And there was a pattern of fetishes and none of us knew each other, but the pattern of behavior was the same. Variations on a theme, but the same. And it was just so incredible to think of all of the lives that were damaged to preserve his life, his career, and his twisted sexual perversions. So I know so many of the survivors who are so gifted, so talented, whose lives and careers had just gotten started and believed in this good guy, Dr. Cosby, he was gonna, or Dr. Huxtable, the OBGYN that he portrayed on his show. He was gonna make them famous. And as it turned out, what I learned from some insiders is that he made a lot of guys famous. Well, not famous, let's say successful, gave them successful careers, not just a one-time great gig, but entire careers were made for these guys for supplying him with an endless supply of females. He would drug them, and then what we understand, he would have a party. He'd call in his buddies, and they would have a party on this unconscious woman's body. And many of the women would wake up later back in their apartment with their car parked in front and have no memory of how they got there, but would wake up bruised and swollen and sometimes bleeding anally. And clearly knowing that sex had happened on their bodies without their consent. So from the time that it happened to me in the 60s, his drugging became more sophisticated and his perversions expanded, and, he became more empowered because he was getting away with it all. So there were a lot of other people I know that joined the party, and I'm sure that we have a similar situation in our government right now, which is why nobody's doing anything about it, because nobody else wants to be exposed, because they were probably all part of the party.
We had a huge TV star here called Jimmy Savile, and he got away with it for decades as well. He was like the most famous person in this country at one point, and he was hobnobbing with the Prime Minister, the Queen, the Pope gave him a papal knighthood. And there was, his brand was worth so much. All of these people that complained about him, it was all covered up for decades, and it's absolutely sickening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, Prince Andrew.
And now we've got Epstein, Prince Andrew. We've done a lot of coverage on that.
Yeah.
And and nothing ever happens to any of these people. I think you touched on it earlier about how untouchable they are.
Mm-mm.
I mean,
and the women are expendable, because after all, we're just furniture, we're livestock, we're property.
How did you feel when Bill Cosby got sentenced? And then how did you feel when they reduced and released him?
Well, I was right there when he was sentenced. I was in the courtroom. I was at every trial, and speaking to the media, because many of my sister survivors were unable to speak because they were in litigation. I was not. because my situation was very far beyond the statute of limitations. So I had the opportunity to speak all I wanted, and I could speak for everybody. Well, that's arrogant to say that I was speaking for everybody, but I had the platform, and I used it. And it was very healing for me. And I saw him walked out of court in handcuffs with his baggy pants and his baggy white shirt and his suspenders. And there was a brief moment when I felt sorry for him because he looked so pathetic and old and pitiful. But then I saw this little smirk. And I realized in that moment that he was acting. He was thinking that he was going to get out of it, because he'd always been untouchable. Surely this was just a little glitch in his MO, his modus operandi. Surely this was just, a little scenario that he would, he'd go to court and, go to the police station and, they'd have him bailed out in a heartbeat. But then he was there. His sentence was 3 to 10 years. And in court, he was told that he had to, once he was out, he had to register any town he arrived in while he was traveling as a registered violent sex offender. And he said, before, it just shows the disconnect. He said, well, does that mean then if I'm only going to a town for one night to do a show that I have to register? He didn't realize that he was going to prison. And he would sit there and rub his head and act sleepy and chuckle to himself and act like he didn't care what anybody was saying on the stand. Didn't mean anything to him, he was fine, His wife would show up and rub noses with him on occasion. And, and she's complicit, obviously. She was his personal manager. She held the purse strings, and one of the women allegedly, or says that allegedly she woke up in the drugging with Mrs. being part of it. And we all wondered why Miss Winfrey didn't speak out, since she is a women's advocate. We were very disappointed when we discovered that she was Mrs. Cosby's best friend. So she did speak out once the Weinstein women became public.
Yeah.
Because then she could safely speak out at the Oscars, and it was very beautiful and wonderful and inspirational. But of course, the Weinstein women came out because they saw us come out. We opened the floodgates of the second wave of the Me Too movement. And because we weren't beheaded in the public square, eviscerated, crucified, everybody else suddenly found their voice, and they were empowered to speak out, and that just opened it all up, Pandora's box. But in the summer of 2016, I became a founding member of a group, a coalition called End Rape Statute of Limitations, to abolish the statute of limitations on rape and sexual assault in California. It had only been 10 years, so those of us who had been assaulted prior to 10 years could seek no legal justice. So we gathered together, we carpooled up to Sacramento, the state capital. We lobbied, we testified in the Senate Committee on Public Safety. We rallied on the state capitol steps. We rallied on Hollywood Boulevard on Bill Cosby's star. We spoke out loud and clear. We had T-shirts with our aerosol logo on them, and we knew no fear at that point. And we got his honorary doctorate degrees stripped from him. We got many statues and, honorariums taken down. We did a lot of good stuff. We harassed him in his performances when we could. And it was just the most grand time to feel. It was like once we were speaking out, we felt so light, like we'd been carrying this heavy weight around forever, like this infection, this pocket of infection with us, all these years that we'd just been working around as we move forward with our lives. And suddenly we lanced that boil, and all the infection poured out, and suddenly we were light. And we didn't even realize we'd been heavy. And that was I can't even find a word for it, But it was incredible. It was just incredible. We found so much empowerment and just joy. For the first time, I felt like I could move forward, and I was able, bit by bit, the layers started peeling off. And for the first time, I was also able to say I'm a multi-rape survivor, because suddenly I was with other women, other survivors, and they were saying it out loud. And I was going, gosh, I never even thought to say that out loud, to even admit it to anyone. I had never told anybody about the horrible 3 months that my first husband had sold me. And I was able to finally reveal that. And that was another layer lifted off of my soul, my heart, my spirit. And I started feeling clean, and I started feeling like I could do anything. I could finally do anything. And I had been trying to write this book for 20 years. I don't know if you can hear my little one yipping in the background, my little dog. He probably needs me to pick him up. He can't walk.
Oh.
And he's in a diaper, but typical guy, he feels he has to stand up to pee. Even though he may have already wet his diaper. But anyway, so I have to pretend to walk him so he can do his little business. But anyway, so we just started, all of us survivors started picking up the banner. My sister survivor, Lisa Lawton Lublin in Nevada, she and her husband started getting a senator to write a bill, and they were able to extend the statute of limitations in Nevada to 20 years from 4 years. And then Heidi Thomas and Beth Ferrier-Tillow in Colorado, they did the same in Colorado. And then it just started, everybody started picking up the banner. And during the Cosby trials, we discovered that there was no legal definition of consent. And so Joyce Short in New York started writing a bill, getting somebody to write a bill for that, and creating a legal definition of consent. And I can never remember it because it's a little complicated, but it's fully informed and mutually agreed, a mutual agreement anyway, fully informed mutual agreement. And that's not completely it, but close enough. And so she's been pushing that. And then in 2021, I think, former Senator Joe Dunn of California co-authored the Adult Victims Act that allowed a 1-year window in which we could file suit and find justice, regardless of the statute of limitations. But our bill went effective January 1st, 2017, but it wasn't retroactive. So the Adult Victims Act opened it all up. So I could then file suit against Bill Cosby, which I did. Unfortunately, there was a glitch in that particular bill in California that was not in the bill in New York, New Jersey, and Nevada, where it was also effective. And the year before, there'd been the Child Victims Act that allowed child victims of sexual assault to also file suit. And then the Adult Victims Act the next year. So anyway, I filed suit. The judge in Beverly Hills dismissed my case twice because of this glitch. And the glitch was this: I had to show that someone knew about what happened and they covered it up. Well, I never told anybody. And the other thing was that I wasn't an actor working on the set. I wasn't in the rehearsal hall. I wasn't in the audition hall assaulted like many of the girls were. It was in a private social setting. And I didn't tell anybody. And the actress that I was with refused to speak to the Washington Post. And she was also with William Morris Agency, which was the theatrical agency that Bill Cosby practically owned. And she had an agent go to the Washington Post, and they said, "We have decided not to speak about this issue." Well, I had lost touch with her, but I spoke to her in 1981. I had gone down to California for Christmas or something, anyway, in the afternoon, late in the fall or something, to see my family with my children. And I thought I hadn't spoken to her since 1969. And I called, her phone number was disconnected. So I called William Morris and I left my number. And she called me back in about 5 minutes. And it was great. We caught up. Everything was great until I brought up that night. And immediately she shut me down and told me I was negative. He was a wonderful person, a wonderful person. I was just being negative. And at that point, the conversation ended, and I have not spoken to her since 1981. And I found out after I went public about Cosby that she had guest starred on one of his shows in 1986. So apparently she had stayed in touch, and I don't know whether she complied or didn't think it was a big deal. Whatever, I don't know. I can't be in somebody else's head. But she has not reached out to me in the 10 years that I have become, probably the most media visible of the Cosby survivors. Me and one of the Afro-Cuban actresses, Lily Bernard. The two of us were in the front of the media the most. She was the young Afro-Cuban, beautiful actress, muralist, and I was the old blonde. And we looked good together, and we were both articulate, educated, and actors, and lived close to the studios, so we were easy to transport for interviews and in the front lines of the activism. So
can I just read you something, Victoria, and get your thoughts on it?
Oh yeah, sure.
So it says on Google, Bill Cosby was released from prison because the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned his conviction, ruling that he was denied due process due to a previous agreement with a former district attorney for immunity from prosecution. The attorney Castor had promised Cosby that his deposition testimony in a civil case would not be used against him in a criminal case, but his successor later used that testimony to charge Cosby. So how did you feel when this release, when he walked free after 3 years in the prison?
Well, of course, we were just stunned and shocked, and we rallied in Independence Square in Philadelphia. We all got together, and all of us survivors and Weinstein survivors and Catholic Church survivors, we all rallied, and did a lot of stuff. NBC had us on talking about how we felt, the rug ripped out from under us, and justice did not prevail. But the backstory of that, Bruce Castor also was the attorney that defended Mr. Trump in his impeachment trials. He was the bumbling attorney. And he was the district attorney in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania. And he told Bill Cosby that if he told the truth, and it was recorded, and we heard his voice in court stating what he had done, that he drugged women so that he could have sex with them. I mean, it was as plain as day, his confession. But Bruce Castor, whose father, by the way, was the realtor who helped Bill Cosby get his Cheltenham mansion in Montgomery County, it wasn't a written agreement that he wouldn't prosecute him. It was it was verbal. So when Kevin Steele, the DA, ran up against Bruce Castor, he used the fact that Bruce Castor had not prosecuted Bill Cosby as part of his campaign, and that Bruce Castor was not hard enough on sexual assault predators. And he won the campaign. There was only one of us, Andrea Constant, who was still within the statute of limitations of 12 years in Pennsylvania at that time. And she was almost up. And so Kevin Steele had to jump on that little window as quickly as possible in order to seek justice and open that case up. So once he did that, I mean, it was a festive occasion for all of us. I mean, we were out in the plaza in front of the courthouse, and there were drums and people dancing, and also the Fat Albert look-alike with a bunch of homeless people who were being given T-shirts with the folds in them saying "Free Bill," and and it was the hey, hey, hey. I mean, it was a circus, literally. And but it was exhilarating. I mean, it was just absolutely exhilarating to see so much attention brought to such a situation that had been, that dark, shadowy thing that nobody talked about, that we lurked in the shadows. Mm-hmm. So to have that happen was just magnificent. And so to find out that it was overturned, he had appealed and appealed and appealed, and they kept turning down his appeals once he was in prison because he refused to participate in the groups in prison for abusers. And ultimately, he wound up getting the appeal. Well, I was visiting my daughter in North Carolina at the time and heading to the airport to go home to California and throwing stuff in the suitcase as I was watching this appeal hearing on Zoom. And as soon as I saw the justices, one of them immediately, I felt my predator thing go off in the pit of my stomach immediately. An older man, and then the woman justice who said, "Oh, I just don't see a pattern here." And I thought, you traitor. But what I understood was that they were using the fact that in the trial that convicted him, we had 5 of our sisters testifying. They were 5 prior bad act witnesses, and they were protesting that was against him. They shouldn't have brought all these women in saying that he had done the same thing to them. And we're going, well, how else do you prove a serial killer? You bring in the victims, the prior bad act victims. And that's how that's how we had to do it. And it was proven beyond a shadow of a doubt. So anyway, he got out just shy of his 3 years. And then he was talking about how he wanted to go back on his, nightclub circuit and entertain and everything. And I don't know. He was going to speak out in, no, I guess this was before he was in prison. Never mind. No, maybe after. I can't remember. Anyway, we have this wonderful activist in Philadelphia, a woman named Bird Milliken, who was out there in front of the courthouse every day with a megaphone and signs and a boombox blasting "I am woman" and a bubble machine, and and she just had no reservations about saying anything, to the press and protesting and joining forces with us. And so he was going to go into a nightclub in Philadelphia and do a little stand-up routine. And I called her. I said, "Hey, we need a protest in front of that nightclub." And she, well, she said, and I quote, "shitting my pants and pulling on my boots." And she was there in a half an hour with a megaphone, the bubble machine, and a boombox, and distracting people from going into the nightclub and circling the club trying to find him with her megaphone, and they snuck him out at the end, But I mean, we just joined this group of women who came together with so much pain that wound up being transferred into so much joy and liberation and empowerment and enrichment of our souls. And it just took, pounds of agony off of our shoulders and off of our hearts and souls. And we're still friends to this day. I mean, what wound up happening, we stayed friends, and laws are being changed, and back to my case, we've withdrawn my case, and they had to write a new bill in California without that glitch. And so I just found out that it has passed, that bill has gone through the final committee, and it is now waiting to go to the governor's desk to be signed, and we should be able to set the trial date by January, this coming January.
Wow, well done.
Yeah. So to refile, let me say, not set the trial, to refile. Yeah. So that's pretty magnificent. So with all of those things happening, I felt inspired to continue writing my book, which I had been trying to write for 20 years and kept hitting a wall. All of a sudden, with the Cosby trial coming to such a triumphant end, that was before he was let out, I completed the book because suddenly I had the missing piece of that story. And it just suddenly all came together, telling my story, as the person I had been as a child and what happened to me, and then ending with, Cosby and me leaving town and walking away from my recording contract and my life and yada, yada, and coming back later and, starting another life, my multiple incarnations, and suddenly it all came together, and made sense. And I published it, and it I think it's a pretty doggone good book. And it tells the story of a woman that from objectification to self-actualization, and how you can transform pain and suffering into something liberating and enriching and fulfilling and healing, that you can heal. You can heal. It doesn't mean that it all is going to go away, but you can neutralize it. and you can turn it into something positive and help others. And that's where the healing comes in, when you can get out of yourself and turn it around and project outwards to others and help them through your understanding of the journey.
And it's
So
such a powerful story. You've self-healed, you've transformed the dark experiences into light, and now you're inspiring so many other people. And good grief, what a journey you've took us on. I mean, people have been watching you now for almost 2 hours, Victoria. Is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers in conclusion?
yes, I wrote and produced a play last year in Hollywood called Shiro, a tribute to my sister survivors. And it was a rebuttal to the media and the questions they asked survivors, the stereotypical questions. And it was a panel of 5 women, one woman answering the interviewer in a polite way, and the other 4 women as the Greek chorus screaming what was really in her head. And then the final question was, well, now that you've spoken your truth and found your voice, how do you feel? What's happened? And then the lights go on, the black robes get dropped to the floor, and the lights come back up, and they're standing in beautiful evening gowns, and they're walking into the light. And my little god granddaughter came out with a basket of rose petals and danced around them and tossed them. And then I sang my final song, which was, "Where was Roy Rogers when I needed him? Where was Sir Galahad? Where was Sir Launcelot before the onslaught, when knights in shining armor should have arrived?" Well, they didn't. And I needed a hero. I needed my cowboy. I needed my daddy's wise words. "Mama, you always told me there'd be only one. But Mama, I've been the only one." And then it goes into the refrain and ends with, "I am my own hero. I am the only one. I am my only one. I am my Shiro." And then all of my cast members started harmonizing with me at the end, and it was just magnificent. And former Senator Joe Dunn spoke. Jim Moray came from Inside Edition and spoke, and different leaders of different organizations against, the National Association for Sexual Assault of Children and, human sales around the country, and legal definition of consent. Everybody came and spoke at the end. And then I called all the survivors in the audience, if they felt comfortable standing up, to please stand up, practically the whole audience. And then they all came up on the stage, and my little god granddaughter, because the stage was the same level as the audience, so I separated with galvanized steel buckets and white roses. And so she took a white rose to all the survivors in the audience. And then they all came up on stage, and we did a big photo op, and it was just absolutely triumphant. It was absolutely triumphant.
Oh, absolute congratulations to you. You're a wonderful soul. And all of your links are in the description box if the viewers are watching this on repeat. The website, the book links, I'm putting them in the live chat now. Huge thank you for just coming on and just blowing us away with the story. It's so inspirational, Victoria. I'm gonna let you go so you can tend your dog, and I'm gonna close the show. But if there's anything ever we can do to help you from this side of the world, you please let us know. And thank you again. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Sean, and thank you so much for having me. And it was wonderful being able to meet you and share my story. There is healing. There is healing on the other side. And buy my book.
Definitely. A privilege and an honor. Take care. Take care of the dog. We'll see you later. Cheers, Victoria. Thank you.
You bet.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
What a phenomenal guest, folks. Wow, just heartbreaking. Some of the story. Many of you were crying as well. I could see in the chat. You said the story, the swimming pool. Oh my God. honestly, it was like a sledgehammer to the head. But thank you for all the love and support that's come in. Please support Victoria. The website, the book links. If you're watching on replay, they're in the description box. I've just put them again in the live chat again. And just to let you guys know what we've got coming up tomorrow, we might have several shows tomorrow. It looks like Jay-Z's son, Rymia, is coming back for a part 4 at 6 p.m. It's been a while. It's going to be good to hear what he has to say. Then we've possibly got someone coming on about Princess Diana being unalived, the conspiracy. And then we've possibly got Kevin Annette coming on with an update. He wants to break it on our channel first with an update on the case against the Pope. So lots more. It's going to be a big night tomorrow, folks. But yeah, please share this story and let's get it out there for Victoria. It's so important what she said. I mean, you know, she just built up the early years and then just boom, sledgehammer. It was phenomenal, the journey she took us on, and such a fantastic speaker. So thanks for tuning in. Hope to see some of you in tomorrow's stream.